Hello, everyone. This is Matthew Morookian, Senior Manager of Product Marketing at apexanalytix. Thanks for joining the webinar today. Angela, could you take down the on hold sign or slide if possible? I want everyone to see my face and see my background. All my plants died, so there's nothing in my shelf. It's very barren in here today. But thanks for joining the webinar. It's called Managing Risk in a Multi-Regional and Cross-Team Environment. Very long title, and there's a lot to unpack here. And so we have Akhilesh Agarwal, Senior Vice President of Global Business Partner Technology Solutions at Apex, and he will walk through Apex Portal and how it ensures compliance against country, regulatory, and internal requirements. And then it will show something that I really think is the most interesting thing about Apex Portal, which is the configurable rules engine. It allows an end user to update rules themselves without getting IT or Apex involved. So Akhilesh, I am going to hand it off to you. But if anyone has any questions, just type them into the chat box. I will be monitoring. And Akhilesh, it's showtime.
Thank you, Matthew, and good morning to everyone who joined today. So as Matthew mentioned, we'll be talking about different use cases in terms of compliance and risk. I'm sharing our Apex Portal demo instance right now. And what I'll do is I'll log in with different profiles and show you some of those use cases. The first use case I want to cover is global business rules and how Apex Portal has almost 180,000 business rules configured out of the box for different countries in the world. So anyone can take advantage of it right out of the gate. And on top of that, during any implementations, we configure any client-specific rules that you may have. In addition to those client-specific rules, as the market conditions changes or other industry-specific rules and regulations come about, it's very easy for any client or Apex to go back in and reconfigure or add new rules. And I'll provide a demonstration for that as well. So the first use case I want to cover is how some of the global compliance rules work out of the box. So I'm going to log in as an administrator and open one of the vendor profiles and walk you through it. During this walkthrough, I'll be changing the supply country or the tax registration country, if you will, so that you can see different combinations of those rules. In various other settings, we typically talk about United States, but in this session, because I want to cover global business rules, I'm going to start with a supplier which is registered in the country of Japan to see some of those global business rules, and I'll kind of switch the countries as we go along. So the first thing, as an administrator, if I'm editing the supplier's profile, or even when a supplier is logged into the system and they are updating their profile on their own, the system comes pre-configured with a variety of pages in the registration module. So you can see on the left side, there's a general business information page, country-specific information, which the client owns, and it's very ERP specific. Then you have business address, the tax information, banking, and so on and so forth. So one of the great things about our rules engine is any number of pages, any number of fields can be added or removed, or make it conditionally required or visible based on the business requirements. So it's very easy to configure these selections in the rules engine. And as a result of that configuration, we see the rendering of those pages in real time. So from an architectural perspective, developers don't have to go back in and do programming. It's mostly configuration for the Apex portal. So in this example, we are seeing an existing vendor profile, which has a vendor number from the ERP. The country of the supplier is Japan. So Japan's specific business rules will start getting applied on this vendor profile. As new vendors get onboarded or existing vendors log in, they'll see their data automatically in the system, which we have in the Apex portal. And in case of a new vendor, they can fill in most of the new information they are going to provide. We do support multiple users out of the box, so any number of additional users from the supplier's company can be added. And this provides that added level of security into the system so that we can protect the supplier's data. Uh, so you can see some of the global business rules out of the box configuration here. Supplier country is absolutely required. The type of supplier which gets set up in the ERP, all of these drop downs are configurable. So the values which are acceptable in the ERP can be configured here. So out of box, you would take advantage of the default setup, and then we can fine tune the system as per the requirements. So over here, there are a certain number of required fields and other fields are optional. To move on to the next section, you can see some country level business information page here. If I try to edit one of these rows, because I'm logged in as an internal user, I'm pretending to be an administrator in a company like yours. So I'm not logged in as a supplier right now. So I'm seeing additional pages which are visible only to an administrator or internal employees of the client. So this screen is showcasing some company code specific or operating unit specific business rules depending on which ERP you use. And you can apply these conditions and make certain fields required, like payment terms, payment methods, and so on and so forth. We also have capabilities where, let's say, if the payment terms are defaulting to net 60 as per your corporate rules, but an inviter or a person who's setting up the vendor selects less than default payment terms, we can also route the request to a payment term approval workflow. And only after they are approved, the vendor gets set up in the ERP or the new payment terms get applied in the system. So any number of additional fields can be added or removed based on the scope of the implementation. The system is fully configurable here. So this is an example of client-specific rules which you can apply based on your company codes. Moving on to the next screen, which is the address information. So by default, at least one registered address or a physical address is always required in the system. That's an out-of-box configuration. But we do support any number of additional addresses to be added here, and they automatically get linked together using a parent-child relationship. So if a vendor enters additional remit addresses, purchase order addresses, return addresses, all of those can be captured here and integrated with the ERP system. One of the benefits of these out-of-box rules is how we apply the globalization or the localization into the system. So you can see in this example, the vendors being registered in the country of Japan. They've entered a Japanese address, but there are two additional names that are required from the vendor. What is the kana name and the kanji name? How these names are important is the supplier has registered in English so far by entering the English version of the name. But as we send payments to different countries, in this case, Japan, based on whether it's a domestic payment or an international payment, the banks require either the kana name or the kanji name. And if you don't have these names captured and you're not sending these names in your payment file, more than likely your payments to Japan will be rejected and returned. And then you'll have to manually edit the payment file. So we take care of it out of the box. And in this example, we are automatically requiring these two names so that the vendor provides it upfront. And when you do end up sending the payment, whether it's domestic or international, we are automatically able to apply the right name in those scenarios. Similarly, if the country of the supplier changes, right? So for example, if I pick China or Vietnam or Thailand or any other country, the equivalent local country names in those, especially the South Asian countries, get applied automatically, right? So Japan, China, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, those are some of the examples. We capture the local payee names in those countries in the local language, and it helps you with sending payments globally. The system also supports addresses in local characters. So if you're registering vendors in China or Japan or Malaysia or Thailand, etc., the suppliers are able to enter Unicode address information, either in English or in their local characters. We are able to validate that information. And we also have an additional feature where you can capture both versions of the address. So if the local address is entered in local characters, we can automatically transliterate uh, the local address in English and also store an English version. So it helps you with maintaining a good vendor master, which is clean and accurate and validated.
Akhilesh, I think it would be good if you could just speak to the different languages supported by Apex Portal. I know you were just talking about local characters with regards to address. Can you just talk a little bit more about the whole portal?
Sure. So on the language support, since we talked about it in the address screen, there are many languages which are supported in the Apex portal out of the box. So on my screen, you're seeing an example where I've clicked on the language selection, and you can see a number of languages. These are approximately more than 20 languages which are supported by default. And additional language packs can be added based on your requirements, right? So our architecture allows us to support any number of languages in the world. These are most commonly requested language packs that previously we have implemented with different clients. But if you have a specific language requirement, we can easily add it here. One great thing about these language packs is not only it changes the look and feel of the application. So if I select a different language, it will render all of the characters differently. Uh, but you can also use these language selections to send email communications in the vendor's preferred language. So that's also an out-of-box feature. And lastly, even while working with different data sets, the example I showed you on the address screen, for example, is we are able to store data in different languages. So you can see here's a mix and match scenario where we have most of the data in English, but for specific reasons, we have entered the name of the vendor in local Japanese characters. So we are able to store data in any number of languages worldwide. And lastly, we also have support for formatting of data. So if a supplier logs in, let's say from Japan, they'll likely see the dates in year, month, day format, versus anyone logging in from US who will see the dates in month, day, year format. So depending on the language pack selected and of course the country of the supplier where they're logging in from, the date time format, the currency code format, the numbering format, all of those will be formatted differently. So thanks for asking that question, Matthew. So we have just talked about some of the global business rules from an address capture perspective and how we validate addresses. To showcase some of the additional rules that we have built into the system, let's talk about tax information next. So on the tax screen, you're seeing an example where the supplier selected their not only having a physical address in Japan, but they also have tax reporting country as Japan. Sometimes it can be different for global suppliers. So if they select the tax reporting country as Japan, the tax type, which is issued by the Japanese National Tax Agency, is a required field. Now, based on the business entity type, for example, I've selected company here, but maybe if I select individual in certain countries, the tax information becomes optional. So we have all of those rules configured out of the box for every single country in the world, and also based on business entity type. To showcase some other examples, if I pick, let's say, United States here, the screen is going to refresh and apply the US specific rules. And now you can see For United States, it will require the EIN number and not allow me to proceed without this information. Same way, if I, let's say, pick another country like Mexico, now the system is going to refresh, apply the Mexico specific business rules, and now it's requiring either the VAT number, RFC number, CORP number, and so on and so forth. So these are some examples of when I talked about 180,000 business rules pre-configured. These are the examples, right? So think about every single country in the world and the tax rules for different business entity types. Think about address rules, which I demonstrated earlier. We are going to talk about banking and insurance and so on and so forth. And very soon, if you start adding all the permutation combinations, they go beyond 180,000 rules. So one of our objectives is to make sure from a compliance perspective, from a risk mitigation perspective, you're capturing the right data set and you're not getting a B notice from IRS, for example, or similar tax compliance issues from other country. The next section deals with banking. Over here, you can see payment method is electronic, so we require a bank. On the banking screen, depending on the country of the supplier, specific banking information is required. So all of these are pre-configured. I did cover how our bank validation works and how we mitigate risk and fraud in our previous demo last week. In this session today, I would like to focus on some of the banking rules and data capture rules in terms of compliance. So you can see the bank country is Japan, so we are requiring something called a Zenjin code, which is the routing number for banks in Japan. But if I now change, let's say, the country of the bank to Mexico or any other country, then the local banking rules for that country will apply, along with any payment currency rules or restrictions using which you can pay the vendor. So for Japan, it was the Zenjin code, but when I selected Mexico, it's requiring a CLABE number or a Banco number, which is the local routing number for Mexico. And similarly, like as I change to different countries, it will apply country-specific rules in the banking and automatically adapt the screen. So you're never in doubt when you're setting up international vendors or global vendors. The system is pre-configured to find out every single country specific rule and ask for that information automatically. You will also notice that in addition to the ABA routing number, we typically ask for the SWIFT code. And in most cases, we are able to auto-populate the SWIFT code if the bank has a SWIFT code to begin with. How that helps you is you have all of the relevant information in terms of banking out of the box, and you're able to apply and map this information in your ERP system. So today you may be making a domestic payment to the vendor. Tomorrow there may be an international payment going out. Guess what? You already have the SWIFT code, which can be reused later. So you don't have to reach out to the vendor all over again. So we are making sure any and all banking information is just captured upfront. Lastly, we also support intermediary banking. So if the supplier says, I have a bank which doesn't have a SWIFT code, but I use an intermediary bank to capture or receive payments, they can select yes and enter the intermediary banking details. So we're making sure not only you're compliant with different global rules, but you're also able to transact with the vendor with this out-of-box configuration. So that's how the banking rules work. Moving on, we have different pages with different default settings built into the system. The next page talks about insurance information. And as you can see here, because I edited the bank and I have not put in the required information, it will not let me proceed, right? So those required field indicators and all of the information must be entered before I can successfully proceed. So just in order to make sure we are able to proceed, I'll delete this bank record, actually change the payment method to check so I don't have to enter real banking data, and we'll move on with this session. That's another example of business rules. I change the payment method to check because I have permission to do so, and now banking is not required. Insurance information for different type of suppliers, you may require insurance certificates. One of the nice things about capturing this insurance data is to show you an example, we have notifications built into the system. So let's say for a particular type of supplier or a country of the supplier, or based on the products and services you're getting from the supplier, you require an insurance certificate or other types of documents that may end up expiring. So this is an example of notifications that can be sent out to the supplier uh, when the documents are about to expire. So this is an example of the email which the supplier will receive, documents expiring soon, and it actually indicates which type of document, in this case insurance certificate, is expiring and when is it expiring. Or if it has already expired, they'll get reminders about that expiry. So you don't have to follow up with vendors manually. uh, it also helps you with risk and compliance. Let's assume you're needing the insurance certificate to make sure you're legally required to have insurance certificates. The system does the follow-ups for you, right? In case of a tax document like a W-8, which also expires, the system is not only able to enforce those rules, but also send expiry notifications on a W-8 so that you have the latest version on file. So we are making sure with these out-of-box configurations, you're in full compliance, both from a tax perspective, banking perspective, insurance, or any other type of documents. We have the business biography section. So this is another example of how we can conditionally apply business roles. So over here, you will notice that some of the fields are optional, but in case the vendor is in Japan, the CEO name and CFO name are conditionally required because we actually have a OFAC regulation that for any vendors in Japan, these two field data points must be captured, and we actually are obligated to validate against the OFAC list. So not only the name of the vendor, address of the vendor, etc., but actually the CEO name and the CFO name must also be validated against the OFAC list. So this is again an out-of-box configuration, and as these regulations change, and Apex becomes aware of it because we work with global Fortune 1000 clients and we do our own research. We keep on adding these baseline rules in our foundation, and then we publish it to all our clients who want to take advantage of it. So that's something that you get as part of your subscription. So moving on, now that we have captured the information which will ultimately be validated against OFAC, that's another example of a global business role. Subsequently, these pages go on. The supplier can enter whether they are a diverse vendor or not, and lastly, upload any documents that may be required, and ultimately finish submitting the profile, right? So that's one of the use cases which we wanted to talk about, which is the majority of the theme for today's demo: risk and compliance, in what benefits you get with our out-of-box configuration. There are a couple more use cases I would love to talk briefly about, and one of those is, in addition to what you saw as part of our registration module, we also have certain added benefits in terms of risk and compliance if you were setting up a vendor. So I'm going to now log in as one of the global suppliers who has been conditionally enabled for risk questionnaires. We are going to cover our risk module in depth in subsequent demo sessions. So please do sign up, keep a lookout for it and sign up for it. But in today's session, I do want to give you a preview of how that looks like. One of the biggest industry risks out there right now is suppliers' emails getting compromised. If you think about the infamous SolarWinds incident that ended up infecting a lot of companies worldwide, including our Department of Defense, or if you look at the hacking event that happened with Microsoft, and subsequent malwares or ransomwares that get infected in different companies from time to time, it generally ties back to the supplier's email or a company's email address getting compromised. So it's just one email of a person who has the right access to their company, especially if they belong to IT, who have elevated permissions. If their emails get compromised, the entire supplier's network is at risk, and then subsequently the supplier's relationship with your companies is at risk. So what we do to mitigate that risk is we have all of these security controls baked into our system. In last week's demo, I talked about how we are securing suppliers' data with security controls and validations, but we just can't stop over there. So one of the other due diligence that you can do as part of supplier onboarding is ask questionnaires like the one I have on screen. It's an IT questionnaire. And one of the questions that we are asking the suppliers during onboarding is, do you support single sign-on? Which mitigates a lot of compromise in terms of passwords getting leaked. We also ask the supplier, do you support multi-factor authentication? And if not, then the supplier is at a great risk of their own emails getting compromised and ultimately putting risk on the clients too. So these are examples of some of the risk mitigation and compliance questions you can ask from the supplier. And ultimately, we build a scorecard, it goes through your approval process, and so on and so forth. So I'll be covering a lot of these risk management benefits in subsequent demo sessions, but just wanted to give you all a highlight about how we manage risk from an IT perspective today. So that's another use case I wanted to discuss. And then, I do want to take a couple more minutes and show you the power of our rules engine. So all of the rules that you just saw getting applied out of the box is really configured using an Apex developed proprietary rules configuration engine. A lot of our clients are using it to make their own changes post go live. So once they're live, instead of paying Apex with a change request, clients do get trained on our rules engine and they are able to make these changes or rule changes themselves. So if there's a workflow change, if there's a data requirement change, as a client, you are able to make changes yourself in the system. So I'll give a demo of that. Other clients also make use of this rules engine even during the implementation cycle. Obviously, with any change, there's always a risk of go live dates changing, but some clients actually take the ownership. Again, instead of going through a change request process with Apex during implementation, they're able to go in and make changes themselves and reduce the risk of the go live dates changing or moving out in future. So those are some of the practical benefits of a rules-based engine. Not only you get all the rules out of box, but you have full control over them and you can manipulate them yourself. So what I'm doing now is I've gone into the admin menu, and with the right roles and permissions, I can get access to this rules configuration menu item. And once I click on it, I get navigated to this screen, which is our rules engine. There are different type of rules built into the system: data capture rules, action rules, which covers workflows, which covers email notifications, and then there are form-based rules, which cover document requirements. So I won't cover all of those use cases, but just wanted to give you a preview of how our rules engine work and actually make a rule change and show you in action. So what I will do as a use case for using or entering new rules, I'm going to select one of the templates. There are many templates built into the system for data capture, like address, banking, tax, and so on. And along with the header data that we capture, which is part of the registration template. So I've clicked on the registration template, and in the screen, you're seeing a number of pages that you saw in the demo earlier today. So supply agreement, the business information, address, tax, and so on. So these are the pages that you saw, which the supplier is required to complete. What I'm going to do is go to one of the pages, which is the business biography, where you saw the CEO name or CFO name being required. Uh, in this page, there are two sections. One of them is business background. And now you're going to see a list of fields in this section that come up on the screen. So owner name, CEO name, CFO name, number of employees, and so on and so forth. So over here, I'll first show you an existing rule on how our system works. So if I click on the CEO name here, there are a number of attributes that are applied. One of those attributes is validation required or validation not required, meaning is the field required or not. So if I click on validation required false, it means by default, there is no rule tied to it. As you can see, there's no rule header, there's no rule definition. So by default, this field is going to be optional. So how did I make it required when the country of the supply is Japan? So if I click on the validation required true attribute, you can now see there's a condition tied to it, which is CEO name required when supply country is Japan. So we can conditionally apply this attribute, which is make the field required, and tie a rule to it. It can have more than one rule as well. So Japan is just one example, but let's assume you also want to make this field required for China or any number of other countries. You could apply that attribute here or add a new rule tied to this attribute. So if I click on this rule header and I hit edit, you can see the basic rule header setup. I've just entered a friendly rule name and a description, and I'm saying trigger this rule whenever the registration information changes. So as the supplier is logged in and making changes, this rule will get triggered. What is the rule definition? Rule definition means one or more criteria tied to this rule. So I have a very simple rule here. I'm stating that when the country of the supply is equal to Japan, then apply this attribute, which is require the field. And that's how the system worked. When I was logged in as a Japanese vendor, this field was required. Now, hypothetically, let's say I also want to make it required for China, or I just want to make this field invisible. I could do all of that using the engine. So I can go in here. Let's take another field to start from scratch so that you can get the full overview of how the engine works. Number of employees right now is a field which is validation required false. So this is an optional field. Now I want to make it required based on certain countries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first enter this attribute, which is validation required. I'll set it to true, and now I've hit OK. So now this attribute gets tied to this field, number of employees, and now I want to add a condition. So now I can select this attribute, I can add a rule and say conditionally require this field, right? So just a sample rule here. Once I've entered this rule, now I have to enter a definition. In the definition, just sticking to a very simple example, you can actually configure a rule based on any and all fields in the vendor master. I'll just pick country example again. But this time, instead of a specific country, I'm just going to select the in operator, meaning one or many countries. And now I get a list. So I can go in here and say require number of employees if the vendor is in, say, Bangladesh or Australia or Austria and so on and so forth. So I've selected 3 countries. I hit update, and congratulations, we have just configured a new rule in the system, which makes number of employees required if the supply is in any one of the 3 countries. Otherwise, the default rule applies, which is no rule at all. The field is optional. So this is how simple it is to configure any number of requirements using the rules engine. Apex uses the same tool in any implementation, but as a client, you can be trained on this and you can configure rules yourself. We can configure email notifications, workflows, document requirements, and so on and so forth. We just don't have to stop there. In fact, our system allows unlimited fields to be added in concept without requiring development. So if you have a large number of fields that you must capture as part of your compliance requirements or maybe internal business rules, you're able to come here add any number of fields and configure them yourself as well. So with any implementation, scope is very important. So we make sure we capture the number of field requirements up front. We do an implementation planning session. But again, the system technically allows you to add unlimited fields. So that's all I wanted to cover in today's session, show you some of the out-of-box rules that helps you with compliance and risk mitigation, but also how flexible the system is, where you can add fields or make your own conditions apply to existing fields so that the system works as you want it to work. So at this stage, I would just like to open up the Q&A and answer any questions.
Akhilesh, I feel like we should just have one session just on the configurable rules engine. This gets pretty interesting pretty quickly. So we did have a question come in, and it was talking more about cybersecurity. So how does Apex prevent cyber attacks, specifically when companies are sharing sensitive info?
Sure. We have a number of controls preventing that risk. So because it's a SaaS-based offering, one of the things we are doing is we are hosting the solution within our environment. That environment is regularly tested for security vulnerabilities. We also do external penetration testing frequently. And we are making sure that our system is protected against denial of service attacks, which is the very common way of compromising any environment, including cyber hacks. So that's just step one. So the environment is protected and the application is protected in terms of vulnerabilities. But now that the system is available, when the supplier or the internal user is logging in and we are capturing information, we are making sure all of the data is encrypted in transit, and it's also encrypted while at rest. So that's another principle we apply to make sure data is not compromised in any way or intercepted while it is being transmitted. Once we have the data, we got to make sure it's secure. So we have a number of security controls to make sure as users are logging in, they're logging in through single sign-on, or we have multi-factor authentication turned on, we have login pattern detection, we have IP address validation, we have security questions and answers, which the vendors or the user who's logging in, they must answer correctly. In the event we sense that there is an abnormal behavior in the login activity. And then most importantly, we also validate banking information to a large extent, including account ownership for various countries, to make sure payments don't go out to the wrong hands. Yes, we have a large number of controls built in to protect that data. And lastly, what I showcased today in terms of cybersecurity is the questionnaires, which the suppliers must answer. So we are also gathering intel about the suppliers with questionnaires. We create a risk scorecard for your suppliers. And then we also have capabilities where we reach out to other third-party websites like securityscorecard.com, and we are able to pull the risk score of the scorecard in terms of how your suppliers are evaluated, not just your company, but how your suppliers are evaluated in terms of cyber risk. So all of this combined provides you with a great solution where you have peace of mind on cybersecurity.
One thing you talked about, but I want you to talk about a little bit more, was bank account validation. And now we're showcasing the portal, but we have other solutions for anyone that's looking to solve something faster than deploying a portal. And one thing we're doing at Apex, we have a benchmarking survey, a procure-to-pay benchmarking survey that we're conducting with large companies. And over 50% have said they've had payment fraud in the past 12 months. So over 50%, 12 months. A lot of them said, I don't know. And so some of them may have had it and they just don't know. So can you talk about how we can validate bank accounts for someone who, maybe this month or sooner than deploying Apex Portal?
Sure. So there are a number of options available for all of you to get a very good jump start, there's a proxy version of our portal, which can be easily enabled in a matter of a week or a couple of weeks. So you can start taking advantage of all of the out-of-box configuration that I just showcased today, including all the validations that come out of box and so on. The second way is use our SmartVM application using a subscription, which requires, again, no IT implementation. All you need to do is drag and drop your data in a particular format, and we'll do all of the validations with your existing vendors, and you get the output. And the last one is SmartVM API subscription, where you can actually retrofit all of our validations in an application of your choice. So that's how you access it and get a jump start on using the features as soon as possible. Of course, we can always do a full scale implementation where it's all integrated with your ERP and customized business rules are configured. But in terms of bank account ownership validation, Matthew, what we do is we have ownership validation for 3 countries out of the box, which is United States, India, and Sweden. So for these 3 countries, we can actually verify the owner name using a connection with the local banking networks in those specific countries. So we get information around, account ownership, the business entity type, when was the account opened, and so on and so forth. So that helps mitigate fraud and payments going out to the wrong hands. But we don't stop there. Very recently, Apex has come up with an Apex proprietary bank account ownership score that can be applied to all countries. So think about suppliers globally. Apex happens to have a SmartVM database with 40 million golden records. Those 40 million golden records also have bank information associated with a large number of suppliers. We know how many bank accounts are being used by how many clients to make a large number of payments for a number of years. So if apexanalytix has a bank account and our clients are paying us for the last 10, 20 years, 30 years into that same exact bank account, the confidence score is so high because there has been no past reported issues on it. And we know because of the past history of that vendor, the bank account really belongs to Apex, right? Or IBM or any other company. So similarly, we are able to take your data set as suppliers log into the portal, or you have a bank change request. You can always apply the Apex bank account ownership score and gain confidence whether it's likely belonging to the supplier or not, and then take subsequent actions, right? So that also helps prevent fraud on a global basis.
So I have 2 more questions for Akhilesh. I like this. I just prompt you and you give a good explanation. But if anyone else has a question, please submit it. So one thing we were talking about multi-regional, I know Poland has some AML requirements regarding payments over a certain amount. Can you just speak to that briefly? And I believe that's being adopted in some other countries. So it's something that should be, someone should be focusing on it now, not just focusing on the requirements in Poland.
Yeah, exactly. So Poland is an example, and I'll talk about a couple more countries. So specific to Poland, the government of Poland, starting January 1st, 2020, they came up with a compliance requirement that as you're making payments to Polish vendors, if the payment amount in a single payment cycle is more than $25,000 approximately, then you must validate the VAT number of the supplier, the Polish supplier, and you must validate the bank account ownership of the Polish supplier, without which you're not technically or from a compliance perspective allowed to make payments to that Polish supplier, right? So with every payment run, you have to check the payment amount and then revalidate VAT and bank account ownership before that payment goes out. So that's a Polish government compliance requirement. We have actually successfully integrated with the Polish government's API for these 2 validations. So we are actually able to revalidate the VAT for a long time, since day one of our launch actually. But in addition to VAT validation, now with the Polish government API, we can actually do the bank account ownership validation as well. The current limitation which the Polish government has put on these validations is we can only do 500 validations in a given day. So if we apply that validation across all our Apex clients and the number of vendors, we run out of 500 checks per day very quickly. So as of this moment, even though the integration is in place, we have not formally launched it because we want to work with the Polish government on increasing the number of checks per day. Otherwise, we are very limited in that manner. But that's a government regulation, and all our clients are actually obligated to meet that requirement before the payments go out, right? So Apex Portal has built-in VAT validation, so you're able to take advantage of it, and the ownership validation limited to 500 per day. So that's just one example, but we have those rules built in. The second example I want to talk about is the UK CCO, which is the UK Corporate Criminal Offence Act. UK CCO obligates all the clients, such as you on this call, to revalidate the VAT number of the vendor on an annual basis. If you're making payments or doing business with suppliers without a valid VAT number, it's now a criminal offense in the country of UK. And instead of holding the supplier accountable, the UK government is also holding clients accountable for that transaction. So it's a criminal offense in UK if you don't have a valid VAT number for a vendor or doing business with such a vendor and not revalidating on an annual basis. So very important, you must have proof of revalidation every year to comply with that regulation. The UK CCO Act also obligates clients to make sure that anti-money laundering rules are applied in the system, which means if the supplier is getting payments outside UK, but they reside in UK, so they have an offshore bank account, there are at least 3 questions you must ask from the supplier: why they have an offshore bank account, make sure you have that data captured in the supplier's profile. So if you ever get audited, you have the necessary details to pass that audit.
Okay, last question, Akhilesh. We talked about suppliers and you showed how they can self-register and data can get validated. But when the company purchases Apex Portal, they already have thousands of suppliers. So how do we get them through the process?
Sure. Great question again. And this goes back to how we make sure the adoption is high post go live. So once the system is live, day one of go live, because at this time we have tested the bidirectional integration and the data load, etc. So day one of go live, we will take all your suppliers which are in scope from your ERP system and do a full data load in the Apex portal. So we are not starting from scratch. You get the benefit of loading all existing suppliers in the system. Once all these suppliers are loaded, then we take the next step of notifying those suppliers by making an announcement that as a client, we have launched the Apex portal. Going forward, any and all changes to your vendor profile must be initiated and submitted through the Apex portal. So as a client, the best practice is you stop all other channels of accepting bank account changes or any other changes to the supplier's profile. So as a process change, you have to mandate it and redirect all your suppliers to the Apex portal. But we also work with you on making that email notification go out to your suppliers. They also get a login credential using which they can log into the system and make sure their profiles are up to date. In a lot of cases, very common scenario, we see the supplier's existing record doesn't have emails, or the contact information is missing, address information is missing, banking information is not accurate, or maybe you're using a check payment method. So the advantage of the Apex portal is once you have redirected the suppliers to use the Apex portal, then they are able to fill in all of those compliance gaps, make sure you have the updated W8 or W9 or other tax documents on file, And only then, once the suppliers updated their information, they can submit the change, and it goes through your workflows and ultimately your ERP system. If the supplier doesn't have an email address on file, obviously they're not going to get that notification. So in those cases, as a client, you can actually redirect the supplier to this screen, which is the first time user screen. So built into our system is identity authentication using some of these fields here. As an existing supplier, I can enter new contact information, including my email, and validate my identity using vendor numbers, bank account numbers, tax ID numbers, and other data points that are existing in your ERP system. So once the supplier is authenticated, we are able to add the email address and then provide them with the login credential automatically. So those are some of the ways we help you with onboarding existing suppliers.
So we've come to the end. Thank you, Akhilesh. And we will be doing several more demo webinars covering multiple different topics. And next week on Tuesday, July 27th, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, we have how to bring risk and compliance into a unified supplier management process. And we're going to talk more about those risk questionnaires, some automated risk scoring, and how to implement it at supplier onboarding. So I appreciate everyone's time today. If you have any follow-up questions, just reach out to us. But thanks for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.